And today is April 15th, 2026. We're in Senate institutions, and we have two items, capital bill. First, we'll get the walkthrough from Ledge Council on the actual bill itself, and then we'll have the Commissioner of BGS and the Commissioner of DOC here to discuss the Women's Reentry and Correctional Facility.
Cool.
So, and you know all of that.
No.
And you could walk us through the bill. It's great to finally be at this state.
I know.
Yeah.
Afternoon, everyone. I remain me. I am John Gray with the Office of Legislative Counsel. We're talking today. What are we talking about? The Capitol Bill. H952. You may have seen, I know that when Scott has been in here before, walking through some of this, the header here said, as introduced, that's just because the public version of the Pass by House hadn't been posted yet, but it's the same thing. So I think you guys have already gone through portions of this, at least in the spreadsheet. So as you'll know, the first essentially 19 sections are the money sections of the bill. That includes both your bonding sections and your cash sections. And they track the spreadsheet. It's not the typical way I would describe it. I would normally say that the spreadsheet tracks the bill. But in this case, I think that the bill tracks the spreadsheet, since that's what you guys are familiar with and also what the House Committee was familiar with. So I'm happy to go through the money sections if it's helpful just to hit them so you can see them. But I'm also happy to just jump to the policy sections at the end of the bill if you are making all of your determinations on money based on the spreadsheet. So just a question of preference as to how you would like to do this.
There's a couple of things that we're looking at specifically. So 3-acre parcel.
Okay.
And then the State House entry upgrades.
Okay. I'll just go through and I'll kind of high level because there's stuff. So section, as you know, in the second year of the biennium, the form of the capital bill is a capital budget adjustment act, just like there's a budget adjustment act. And so the set of sections you're going to see are in this odd looking wonky form, where you have a section 1, but it's amending last year's capital bill. And at some point, the section numbers are not going to align, right? This section 1 amends section 1 of the capital bill, but at some point you'll get to a section 4 that amends section 6 or something like that. So the first piece that you're touching is just the total bond authorization in the act, and that's what you see in section 1, and those reflect the totals that you see in the spreadsheet. So these are just reflecting the aggregate totals that you have, and they reflect also on line 9 the amount that is in the first year of the biennium. So those are just numbers that at the end we kind of tally up to make sure they all make sense. We have the, I think, kind of helpful reader assistance headings for purposes of this bill, and the sets here are for your bond funded project authorizations. We'll get to cash shortly. But the updates that you see from the House are updates to section 2 of last year's capital bill, which is your classic kind of BGS section, right? You're only going to see instances of amendment touching language that is to be amended. So presumed within the asterisks or the ellipses, however you think about it, is everything else within section 2 of the capital bill from last year. You're only seeing those pieces that have changed. So the first piece you see for BGS, is the FY26 bonding appropriation for 3-acre parcel stormwater compliance has been reduced from 1.5 million to 1.1 million. That's FY26. You have a similar change, I believe, yes, in FY27. This is on page 2. I'm going to skip over major maintenance and I'll come back to that. The piece that I'm talking about is on line 3, striking the FY27 1.1 million bonded for 3-acre parcel stormwater compliance. So in total, that is removing 400K from FY26 and 1.1 million from FY27 for a total of 1.5 million reduction in bonded dollars for that 3-acre parcel stormwater compliance. The other pieces that you see here in FY27 proposing to increase major maintenance by a little over 500K up to 9,013,413.18 cents. This is commonly, although it doesn't have to be, a kind of bucket into which funds that are remaining at the end of the budgeting process are stored. And so you see an increase here in major maintenance. On line 6, you're going to see a textual change. There have been FY 27 50K bonded for the State House replacement of historic interior finishes. We thought that this might be deemed to not include carpets, which might not be historic. So to ensure that all finishes can be covered by this 50K, the word historic is struck. And then you see for the 120 State Street project for HVAC renovation, a reduction in 1 million in FY 27. One new thing that you do see added by the House committee, because some of these proposals align with the GovRec, as you can see in your spreadsheet. I believe this last piece was added, step 12, by the House committee, and this is 1.3 million in FY 27 bond dollars with State House entryway upgrades, design documents, including comprehensive parking plan and delivery truck access. So that was a corrections and institutions proposal. You can see the aggregate totals at the bottom of that section. Slight reduction, about 400K reduction in FY 26, and a reduction of a little under 300K in FY 27. So a slight tweak to the total. Do I have that right? Yes, yes. This was the section where last year the total appropriation figure did not reflect the correct FY 26 and 27 totals. So this reflects a corrected addition. Yeah.
Okay.
It wouldn't have had any substantive effect on the allocations. It was just, it didn't record the correct total. Okay, so that is section 2. Section 3 also aligns with the underlying capital bill, so that's nice. And amends the human services section. Specifically on page 3, it dramatically boosts funding in FY 27 for statewide planning, design, and construction for HVAC system upgrades at correctional facilities. That was at 1 million in last year's capital bill and jumped up to 9.426 million in FY 27. And you can see the comparable increases for the total for this section.
Okay, because that's 27.
FY 27,
Yeah.
that's correct.
So we don't know, like, we can't tell just from this if that's a result of not spending money in 2026, but we can figure that out in the spreadsheet. Okay.
Section 4, maintaining the alignment, touching your sums that go to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, ACCD. This is bumping up in FY 27 the 25K roadside historic site mark responder dollars to 45K. So adding 20,000 in FY 27 for those roadside historic site markers. On page 4, some added flexibility and a new appropriation for the vets home. So the first piece that you see is in subdivision B, and this you would not see in the spreadsheet, is this authorizing some transfer language or flexibility, essentially. I'll read this without the new added language and then talk about what's added. So subsection B says that the CEO of the Veterans Home is authorized to transfer any unexpended project balances between the amounts appropriated in subdivisions A1 and 2 of this section. A1 and 2 are your FY 26 bonded dollars of 1.05 million for replacement of air handlers and expansion of laundry facilities. Another way to have approached this would have just been to have done a $1.05 million appropriation with a line item that calls out programs. That's not what was done. But anyway, that is what you see in B, is creating flex that existed last year to have flexibility between those two. And it's extending flexibility to move the dollars between those FY 26 projects and this new FY 27 bonded dollar appropriation. That's in subsection C. 1.25 million in FY 27 to the vets home for sewage system and elevator upgrades. You can think of this as essentially providing the total appropriation you see here, 2.3 million for sort of flexible use across replacement of air handlers, expansion of laundry facilities, sewage system and elevator upgrades.
Yep, and we heard from them yesterday. And they're doing exactly that.
Yes. That's great when I'm not used to being in committees where that is what's happening. So that's nice. Okay. I'm sorry. Section 6. Finally, we have our divergence, unfortunately. So now we are amending section 10 of the underlying capital bill. We're not going to have this nice section 6, amending section 6. And this is touching the clean water initiatives. I think this one's, if you look at the dollar figures, you'll be able to see what's happening here pretty readily. Last year's capital bill set out a total FY27 bonded appropriation of $10 million to the Agency of Natural Resources for clean water implementation projects through the Department of Environmental Conservation. It didn't specify within that 10 million sets of projects. What you see on page 5 is a $10 million total appropriation. If you add up all of these projects, it will add up to that $10 million figure. So it's not in any way changing the FY27 appropriation total that was made in last year's capital bill, but it's now spelling out particular projects. So subsection G on page 5, line 4, 1.5 million to the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets for water quality grants and contracts. In FY27 to ANR for DEC for Clean Water State Revolving Fund, you have a little over 1.5 million. And then you have almost $4 million for municipal pollution control grants, again through DEC. These are all FY27 figures. In subsection I, 200K to the Agency of Natural Resources through Department of Forest Parks and Rec for water quality improvements to forest access roads. And then lastly, to VHCB, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, also FY27. You have 800,000 for agricultural water quality projects and 2 million for land conservation and water quality projects. If you add all those up, should be $10 million. So you're just setting out where that 10 million goes. And it's going through Ag, Food and Markets, DEC, Forest Parks and Rec, VHCB. VHCB gets 2.8 million. DEC gets, what, 5.5 basically.
Exactly.
And Ag, Food and Markets gets 1.5.
And that's typical. I mean, they do that every year.
Yeah, so this is not inconsistent, I would say, with the thought behind last year's capital bill. It's just you presumably have more information now. Section 7 amends your judiciary section, section 14 of the underlying capital bill. And if at any point it's helpful to see the underlying capital bill, I don't know that it is, but I do have a tab open with that, so we can flip to it.
So you mean of last year?
Act 33 from last year. Yep. Okay, so we're in the judiciary section, which is section 14 of the underlying Act 33. On page 6, you see a new appropriation for FY27 of about 1.7 million for the Newport courthouse projects. These funds flow from BGS for the judiciary for that Newport courthouse project. That is your set of changes to bond-funded projects, essentially. So we've gotten through the first reader assistance heading related to those pieces, and we will jump next to reallocations. Before I do that, did folks have any questions on the bonded updates?
I don't think so. I mean, you guys check and make sure that this matches. Well, actually, let me just, Scott, ask you a question. So the Newport court. That was the question. So I'm asking you.
I haven't said anything, so I was waiting for your question. Then I was going to identify myself.
Yes.
And then answer your question.
Thank you. The appropriation for FY26 for the Newport courthouse project, I would be surprised if they've actually spent that much money. So would the unspent money roll over into 27?
From FY26, Madam Chair?
Correct.
That's correct. For the record, Scott Moore, joint fiscal. So any funding that they were given would go into this debt ID they had, and this is adding to that same debt ID, I believe.
All right. So they could put all of it in the first year and just leave it that way.
I mean, this gives them more spending to finish the project. Yes.
Okay.
And you can think of some of that as tying into the next section we go to, right? These funds are with these line items essentially, and then there are clawback mechanisms to reclaim those.
So if they hadn't spent it in the next 3 to 5 years, then the repo committee of affairs would say, we gave you this money, you spent some, you haven't spent it yet. And then there's a mechanism that allows us to pull it back.
Right. And even though we don't do the repo, we do hear a lot about it, but it's just interesting to me that the 26 carries forward because that is not the case. the other.
Madam Chair, I think, Senator Ingalls, obviously for the deal about this. This will be done. Excuse me? This will be, the courthouse will be done.
I would say that would be typically is what, would be going forward. I think, without having direct super knowledge as far as, a timeline, I feel very strongly that, these monies wouldn't be moving forward if there wasn't, something that was substantially happening.
And the only reason I asked is because you were very skeptical.
I was,
Yeah.
in the previous, capital bills as Chair Harrison, I would remember, I knew that there was nothing going on at that point in time and for me to, and there was a lot of, disagreement about what would go on and what should happen. And then, I was responsible for stripping money out, several times, several capital bills. If not more than that, because I did see a reason to park that money there where I thought it could be used better in other communities, but in this situation right here, it's go time.
And that was the reason why I asked. I didn't want to continue to commit money to this project if it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So
No.
that's why. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we are gonna have witnesses come in and testify about this. Okay,
All right. So we can jump to reallocations next. This is amending section 17 of the underlying bill. I am going to call out one technical change that you see here. The addition of the word "and" reversion to the title of section 17. Something that's kind of new, truly technical. I think the intent was already pretty clear, but basically to align with Department of Finance and Management practices, try to use the same accounting terms that those folks use. And so in the past, reallocations have been exclusively of bonded dollars. You're finally at a point where reallocations are occurring for cash dollars. And the thinking is that the term reversion is what's used for cash. So this is truly a technical thing, same idea. But that's why you see that new language here.
and you say we're at the point of cash because cash is a relatively new.
Because it's relatively new and the reallocations for that piece don't start immediately upon creation of the cash fund, just like they wouldn't have started immediately for creation of a bonding capacity for capital projects. They start at the point of the clawback provisions, which Scott was talking about before, those 3 to 5 years. It's different for the cash fund. That's a 3-year clawback for cash fund. That was changed last year. It used to be 2. It was kicked to 3 to allow more time to figure out what to do. Although I would note that the committee did make one reallocation of cash last year.
The House Committee.
Ultimately, that's what passed.
Okay, so it's also.
Yes. Okay. So this will be boring for me to read, but I can do it. That's much of life. So, do you want me to? The
Well,
line items?
so reallocation, because I just want to make sure that I'm using the right terms. So reallocation is taking previously appropriated funds and
Taking them back to the real thing to understand it is this clause here. To defray expenditures authorized in sections 2 through 16. The clawback mechanisms are taking essentially unspent money. Just like you were talking about before, the repo committee on the House side has identified a lot of things, and then they're applied to this capital bill. And that's why you sometimes see an increase in that initial bonded dollar, the section 1 total that you see jumped up to 120 million. You might have been asking, where did that additional, 10 plus million come from? Some of that is from reallocations of bonded dollars. They've made available new sources of funding, essentially, or projects in the act. The reason that you see the call out to sections 2 through 16 is that the approach that's been taken is for reallocation. Take bonded reallocations and defray expenditures in the bonded section of the bill, which is sections 2 through 16. And then the cash reversions would be used to defray expenditures within section 19, the cash section. You will see a couple of unique ones where it's proposed to defray expenditures authorized in a specific section. I will just call out that I don't think practically that means a huge deal, because if you're making available the broad full extent of funds to all of the sections, it doesn't really matter how you divvy it up. But for sort of internal thinking purposes, at times the House Corrections Committee wanted to to tie a specific reallocation or version to a specific project that's being funded here. Again, in fact, I don't think this question matters, but you'll see that here. So I think this clause is what makes the most sense of what reallocations are doing, is used to defray expenditures authorized elsewhere in the act, reclaiming money for those purposes.
Okay,
So things that you'll see, subdivision 12 is a little over 43,000 from the 2017 capital bill as amended in 2018 for the East Cottage. So that is taken back. We have a funny one in here I'll call out that I think speaks to your point about what they're trying to do with tracking how much is being spent. I will call out something special, or just something to note generally about the reallocations in subdivisions 13 and 14. If you compare against the parenthetical for the subdivision 12 call out, which says CJTC East Cottage, you can see that that specific reallocation is for a very specific line item. It calls out, section 13B2, and then it can say specifically the East Cottage project. If you look at the reallocations in subdivisions 13 and 14, they just say various projects. They have the citation to 2C. And if you go look at these acts, what you'll see is it's one of the BGS sections that has a number of line items within that specific subsection. And so this is pulling those totals from across a few projects within those sections. So you can't as easily see what all of the projects are, but just know that what that call out is. The other way you can detect this, which is really odd, and I wouldn't presume anyone to read it, but when I use amount, it's one project, and when I use amounts, it's multiple projects.
so is there a list of each of the, like number 13, those amounts? Is there a list of those
There is a
specific
list.
projects?
Yes. Yes, and the way that you arrived, or that this number arrived at your committee, is through identifying these dollars within those specific projects. It's just that the call out is, instead of having, 3 different line items taking 500K here, 500K here, 500K here, it's I went from 6.2 million across.
So
Right?
is it in our spreadsheet?
Not the individuals like that, it just has the amount. Typically what you'll see BGS will have John was saying, if you're doing major maintenance at 17 different buildings and you set aside $10,000 for each building, you're only gonna spend $6 for each building, and you have extras. So when the GovRec puts it all together, they lump it together into various projects. The BGS keeps track of all that list, and if you needed to know the specific projects, I'm sure, well, if it's in a note for the boss, and she can bring it in when she comes.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of the major maintenance because I know that that's multiple projects, but I had the impression that these various projects would have been looked at by the House.
For reallocations, no, they don't necessarily look at the individual projects. If it's BGS or veterans
Oh,
or whatever, they
Okay.
just say, thank you for the money, but we're happy that you didn't spend it. We'll take it and spend it somewhere else. That's what
Except,
this is all
so
about.
just one other. But the way the authority to get the funding back is based on the time frame,
Yes.
and that they haven't spent something on a particular project for a particular time.
Yes, although there are different triggers, right? So the 3 years is a may, 5 years is a requirement, is a shall. So sometimes a reallocation is discretionary, it's a choice to pull, and other times it is the qualifying position.
Okay, I just don't see how we couldn't have a list more easily because the process requires some knowing the time frame.
Yeah, the way the BPO process works is finance management runs a query in Vision, and it lists every single depth ID for every single dollar amount for all of these things. And then we go through and we check with the agency and we say, you had this, and then quite frankly, the Forest Park and Recs, I think it was, had 3 cents and it came due. That's the funny one. And it was,
We should have a minimum to even talk about something.
well, if we didn't take it back, it would just sit there in perpetuity until the treasurer's office say, hey, you have a list of unclaimed property. So there is a certain amount, like that was one of those things where it came up for repo, right? And so it seems silly in some ways, but at the same time, that shows the process is working.
Okay, that's fine. That's good for now. Thank you.
Subdivision 13 is 1.624 million from those various projects in the 2019 capital bill. Subdivision 14 is roughly 400K, is 394, K, from the 2021 capital bill, similarly for various projects. On page 7, I have roughly $197,890 from the women's correctional facilities in the 2021 capital bill. The rest of these are the various projects call outs. So in subdivision 16, we have 618,000 from the 2021 capital bill. We have 350,000 from the 2023 capital bill. So that would be more in your discretionary timeframe, and 150K from another subsection of the 2023 capital bill. All of the section 2 references you see are your classic BGS section, right?
So I do have a question just on the women's correctional facility, the 15. Of the amount appropriated, is this going back to the women's correctional?
This is made available to defray expenditures across all of the bonded sections
So,
in this bill.
okay,
So if you have an appropriation for that purpose, it is made available to it. But you can think of this as just all the reallocations go into a big pool that is used to fund the full of the capital bill bonded sections.
right, but when we have a project that we know is continuing into the future, we
There's not a
don't
direct,
automatically,
there's not a direct correlation necessarily. You will see some instances where things do kind of match up. For instance, when you look at the historical roadside markers, there was money made available because they had some money coming due for historic burial sites. And so they gave back $44,000 and said, could we have $20,000 for the historic road markers? So there's a correlation, but it's not necessarily a necessity that they have to go from one to the other. It's not like a iron
Okay.
like that that's together.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
but just let me say, for the women's correctional facilities, we've been told that we have enough funding to start the project. And the way that we amass that amount of funding is through capital bill allocations. So I would like to know which allocation, I would like to know the total, and I know it's not a fund balance, but something similar to a fund balance for that project in particular, just because it's a huge project.
There's 15 million in there is what we've been told.
Right, exactly.
If they needed more, Madam Chair, more than that, there would be a large appropriations. And if they believed that we were close enough to get there, they would probably be asking for a lot more millions than what it is. This is something that's timed out. It's gone back into the capital bill. It's just not needed at this time. I mean, they told us over and over again that the monies that they have in there is enough money for them to move forward.
They told us that once this year, and so.
I've heard it 4 times, but
Okay.
it's okay.
But it just would make sense to me that you would take funding that you're reallocating for something that you know is going to need a lot more money and put it in that account.
So the one thing I might mention to clear this up a little bit is this is a 2021 fund, so it's at the 5-year limit. And then the governor, when they went through and did a sweep of all the different projects, that's where most of these reallocations came from. The governor's office went through everything and said, hey, here's $100,000, boom. Then the House went through and the House said, we're going to put money to the women's correctional facilities. So there's a little bit of a disconnect because the governor said, here's 100,000, but he didn't say, send it to this women's facility because that wasn't his list of priorities. The House said, we need money for women's facility. And that's how they there's a correspondence, but there's not a direct link.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Relatively, it's a process issue that I.
The governor is giving
continue
money
to
out
have
and
concerns about.
the House got great opinion for that money. And once it went to this great big bucket, the House took some money out of that fungible sense and put it toward the women's correction.
Okay.
I might offer to that more broadly at times, there are specific governor recommended reallocations almost to preserve those funds for continued use for those purposes. It doesn't sound like this is one of those examples, but it basically allows, because those are going to be clawed back shortly, it allows the GovRec to say, we actually want to keep funding this, and this kind of, it doesn't remove the discretionary element, but it expresses a direction for it. So sometimes the reallocation doesn't even express a desire to reduce any funding, it's just trying to get in front of it.
I would also point out, not just a thought that I had in my head, back in 2021, when we had a lot of available dollars to us, there was a lot of dollars parked in areas just because we would want to expend those dollars because they were made available to us. And there was a lot of extra dollars floating around, so it's not surprising to me that a lot of these dollars are coming back to us, that we just didn't use them at that time. We had a lot more monies back then. We parked a lot of monies in a lot of different places, and it's not surprising to me that we're seeing a lot of this dollars come back.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay,
So subsection A reallocations were, and I'll just scroll back up so you can see, those were sums appropriated to BGS. Each of the subsections will speak to appropriations to a particular entity. So subsection B is talking about sums that were previously appropriated to ACCB, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And you see added here a reallocation of about 31,000 from the 2021 capital bill from the unmarked burial funds. One second. Okay. So we're switching gears a little bit to cash. If you're talking about bond and reallocation, you're going to start seeing updates to the word reversion. So the first thing you see here is a cleanup for that exact language. This is from last year's capital bill. It was a reallocation of 1.5 million cash for Vermont Vets Home renovations. And you just see the technical change at the top of page 8 for changing from reallocation to revert. Same in subsection I, so those are cleanup changes to conform to finance and management practices. Okay, but now you do have a set of new post reallocations from different entities. So in subsection N, this is to the Vermont Veterans Home from the 2023 capital bill, reallocating $500,000, that's bonded dollars, from elevator upgrades. And you can see here the unique call out. Instead of defraying expenditures authorized in sections 2 through 16, which is generally what's used for bonded reallocations, this one's used to defray expenditures authorized in section 6. So in this case, you see a specific tie to the Vets Home section of the bill. It's saying, we're taking 2023 capital bill 500K from the elevator upgrades and making it available in section 6. That's where we went over how flexibility was created to move between FY26 and FY27 different projects of the Vets Home. O is reallocating about 63K from the Enhanced 911 board in the 2017 capital bill as amended by the 2018 capital bill. Those are probably available in all of the bonded sections. The most fun one of all, subsection P, reallocating 3 cents. This is from the 2019 capital bill as amended by 2020 for state-owned forest and recreational access points. I think Scott already
right.
described this process.
Is this one going to be done after this year?
It's hopeful.
Okay.
On page 9, we now have sets of cash reversions. So we're switching out of new bonded reallocations from the House Committee, and we're switching to cash reversions. So these are sums that were appropriated from the sub-account for cash fund for capital institution estimates to BGS, and they are reverted to defray the expenditures authorized in section 19. Section 19, you'll recall of the underlying act at 33 is your cash fund section. It's for all the cash offers that you set up. So in sub division 1 from the 2023 capital bill, you have 119,000 roughly from planning, reuse, and contingency. Subdivision 2, you have from the same capital bill, $1 million from the 120 State Street renovation. Subdivision 3, you have 450,000 from the West Cottage, same capital bill. All of these are that capital bill that get to the next subsection. Subdivision 4 is 372K for the short-term stabilization facility. $750K from the Washington County Superior Courthouse in Berry. $250K from planning and design of the Rutland Field Station. And roughly $1 million from EV charging stations, all from the 2023 capital bill. They were all set out in the cash section and these are made broadly available to different expenditures in the cash fund section. Are those, yep.
Yeah.
And the charging stations is that throughout the state or?
I think so, and I want to say there was $1 million initially for that, and it just wasn't spent.
And have they been designated where they're going or?
I'd like to get testimony on that. So,
Yeah.
so if you all could,
We have to follow up to see.
Okay.
is it BGS? Do you know?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Oh, do you want to tell us or?
Not right now.
Okay.
I can't,
I know. I was just.
not able to speak to that right now.
I understand. Okay.
Well, would
But
like
it's
to take
BGS.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a hint to your folks that we would like to hear about?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is just reminding me of Scott's not actually said no earlier, but when I was invited to House Directions this morning, Chair Emmons asked me if I wanted to testify, and I just said no.
Did you really?
Yeah, but it didn't matter that I said no, I still had to go up, so it was worse, right? Turns out I'm
Mood.
truly powerless. Okay.
All right.
Subsection R. So we've been talking about cash appropriations that went through BGS in a particular act. Subsection R are also cash appropriations for BGS, but they came from a different capital bill. That's why they have a different subsection. It would be nice if they could have all been grouped together, but to have the correct call out, it needs its own section. So this is taking from the 2023 capital bill as amended by the 2024 capital bill. Sorry, I'm going to call out one oddity here. I don't know if this matters to you guys, but just because the cash fund has such a strange process, right? You guys authorize as a capital bill and the appropriations are provided in the budget. What you see is the appropriation is called out from the budget. That's why you see a B1103, right? And then we, for tracking purposes, tie it to the authorizations in the capital bills. And so that's what these are. Act 69 is the 2023 capital bill, and Act 162 is the 2024 capital bill. So what this is saying is the 2024 Capital Budget Adjustment Act added cash for the 120 State Street renovation. Those appropriations were made in the 2024 budget. But if you wanted to crack down within the standard capital budgeting process where that is, you would look to the 2024 capital budget. You could also look at the budget, but I just find it harder to read. From that, you're taking 1.5 million again to defray expenditures in section 18. You can see how much this changes this total reallocation section, including both bonded reallocations and cash reversions, how much more money this makes available. The easiest way to see this is just in the total reallocations, reversions, and transfer on lines 8 and 9. The jump from 6.7 million up to 16 million. So you've added nearly $10 million, which is, if you look on the first page at the intent section, when you see that increased figure, that's in part where that comes from.
It was 10% of the bill as it started.
So this fairly significantly boosts the funds available for the capital budgeting process.
And that's total bonded and cash.
In reallocations, yes, and reverse.
Right, so reallocations are for the bonded and reversions are for the cash, right?
Yes, I will say from my perspective, I do not care if you guys consistently just use reallocations all the time. If you find that easier, I will know exactly what you mean. I just don't want it's harder to try to remember like technical language stuff. I will know exactly what we're talking about if we just say reallocations.
Okay.
We're switching. So we had our bond funded project authorizations, and now we have the reallocations. Next, we come to the cash funded project authorizations. So that's section 9, and it's amending underlying section 19, which is where those last cash reversions were dedicated. There's some updates in the intent language to just call out that the appropriations occur across both the 2026 and 2027 Appropriations Acts. And then you can see the updates to the actual cash authorizations on page 11, beginning on page 11. So in FY26, you have an expansion of the purpose of the 1.5 million cash for the Verizon Vets Home. That had been design and construction of the American unit. It's expanded to include sprinkler system installation. You can see the different ways that the House attempted to introduce flexibility for the Vets Home, right? They created that additional authorizing language within Section 6 to transfer funds across different projects. And then now here they've expanded the line item for the cash piece of 1.5 million. The new authorizations for FY27 begin in subsection F. So these are taken from the capital infrastructure sub-account of that cash fund for capital and essential investments. And you can see in subdivision 1.28 million to BGS for statewide major maintenance, 225K for statewide physical security enhancements, again through BGS, 3.6 million for the ASAP River roof replacement through BGS. On page 12, 900K for the Brooklyn multimodal garage renovation, BGS. 3 million through BGS for the 32 Cherry Street parking garage repairs in Burlington. 1.05 million through BGS and AHS for HVAC upgrades at correctional facilities. You'll have seen that addressed in the bonded section as well, if you recall. 225K through BGS for AHS for those statewide correctional facility security upgrades. 700,000 for the door control upgrades, again through BGS AHS. Similarly, through BGS AHS, 1 million for the Northern State Correctional Facility boiler replacement. We got a nice call out to BGS, AHS, and DCF for the youth short-term stabilization facility, 772K. You'll note, I realize that I joke about a lot of things, but the path of funds through various agencies is project specific, right? So these are just routing the money to ensure that right hands touch it. The drinking water state revolving fund, this is through DEC for that state match, almost 2.5 million. All cash. On page 13, again, the DEC, this is for the Waterbury Dam Penstock project cost overruns 150K. We got a little bit of 3-acre rule compliance here, but it's part of a broader line item. 400K, Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation for park infrastructure and rehabilitation, improvement, and 3-acre rule compliance. To the Department of Fish and Wildlife for dam maintenance and safety planning, 200,000. For the Urban Search and Rescue Facility through BGS and Department of Public Safety, 500,000 cash. 500,000 in cash to the judiciary for the Essex County Courthouse Connector project. 1.6 million through BGS judiciary for White River Junction Courthouse renovations. 566K to the Vermont Historical Society for the replacement of a climate control unit. And the big addition that you see here that came through the House Corrections and Institutions Committee is this subdivision 19. One of the pieces, 3 million to DOC to work with the Agency of Digital Services to install a Wi-Fi system in state correctional facilities and appropriately designed to address the safety, security, and confidentiality risks of the correctional environment. You'll recall that this is part of a multi-year effort to get Wi-Fi up in those facilities, and I think it's reflecting some frustration that it hasn't happened yet. You may recall some letters back and forth, including from the ADS, as to why this isn't currently being done, but this is reflecting a desire from the House to move forward with this installation. 3 million. And then on page 14, some pieces you talked about earlier, 1.25 million through BGS for AHS for replacement, women's reentry, and correctional facilities. Those are bond-funded project appropriations, reallocations and reversions, and your cash-funded project authorizations. Note that the cash-funded project authorizations, while the sequencing of the budget and the capital bill was unfortunate on the House side, the cash authorizations did end up making it on third reading as a floor amendment to the budget, so they are contained in the budget
as they were
as the
proposed.
Senate received. Yes. So as you see here, The cash pieces are included in the budget.
So the House didn't change any of the cash in the House floor didn't change any of the cash in this bill,
The House floor did not change what the House Corrections and Institutions Committee recommended for cash appropriations for capital purposes in the budget,
Interesting.
which is, I think, relatively typical.
Yeah. The House Corrections and Institutions put together the changes for the cash and then did an amendment on third reading to inform the rest of the body. Here's what we've come up with. And I heard one voice say nay to the capital bill, but the rest were all yays to the capital bill.
Okay.
If I can find the person on the House, second nay.
All right. Don't waste your time. Thank you.
Okay, we jump next to policy section on page 14. I hope that you guys have spoken to these agencies or departments because they will be in the best position to describe what the intent of these sections are, but I will note that there are some stylistic updates and kind of cleanup things we proposed to the language that we received from the department. So this is language that was requested to be included by the Department of Environmental Conservation. To call out broadly what it does, you can, I'm going to skip past the definition, which I'll come back to in a section just to orient. Title 24, section 4771. You can see this language here. The Vermont Economic Development Authority may make loans to applicants on behalf of the state for one or more of the following purposes. And it provides conditions for sets of loans. These are for upgrades to water systems. And so the proposal, as you can think of it, is that section 4771 provides advantaged loan terms somewhat in recognition of the economic status of inhabitants of particular communities. And so what these sets of sections, section 10 and 11, try to do, as I understand it, is to expand the availability of these loans, which have financially more attractive terms, particularly to the applicants, to include eligible mobile home park water systems. And that's what you see here. Privately owned nonprofit community type system that serves the majority of the users who reside in a nonprofit or resident owned mobile home park registered with DHCD or something Title 10. So we'll get to the section that calls out this strange phrase, privately owned community type system. There's some discussion on the House side as to whether to change this wording ultimately because DEC knows how this works. The program is currently working with this admittedly ambiguous language. The proposal was not to tweak it, but to just update and add a new definition for these mobile home park water systems to basically expand the program to these folks. So this is trying to provide for these kinds of water systems that serve a majority of residents at certain kinds of mobile home parks. What kinds of mobile home parks? They have to be registered with DHCD pursuant to Title 10, and they also have to be either nonprofit owned or resident owned. So those are the two conditions for a mobile home park to be kicked in, and then it has to be this kind of water system.
The community type system.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there's
exactly.
a threshold. It's like 20.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
All right, so we'll get DEC in for that.
And John, if I can interrupt.
Sure.
This section that John just mentioned is updating the current statute to include the mobile home park water system, but the current statute does include phraseology, including administrative fee. And the House, when you see words like fee, it has almost an automatic shunt over to House Ways and Means. It doesn't change any of the fee structure. There's no additional fee income or anything. All this is change the definition of the statute to add mobile home park. But that might have this bill. I'm not sure what the Secretary of the Senate will do, but then the word fee might kick it over to finance.
All right, I didn't anticipate changing
No,
or adding the word fee, but I think it's good
It's
for us to
there.
know.
It's just
Okay,
one of those fundamental ways the statutes work.
so
I
we'll
want to
be
make sure
alert
you're
for
aware.
that. Okay, thank you.
Correct. So that's the definition that you see, and we can see some of the terms in the conditions of loan agreement. So I'll talk about some of these here. Again, I think DEC will be in best position to talk about how it works, but just to note what I'm referencing when I say sort of advantaged terms. On page 15, the loan shall be evidenced by a note payable over a term not to exceed 30 years, so long-term, right? Under subdivision 2, and none of this has changed. These are all existing laws. This has been in place for some time. This is disrupted. Loan secured by assets is determined by VITA, the Rhode Island Economic Development Authority. Loan recipient establishes a dedicated source of revenue. And then under 4, you can see one of the more obvious things. The rate of interest charged for loans shall be set by the state treasurer, taking into consideration prevailing market rates. Available similarly situated applicants. VITA, in cooperation with the secretary, shall periodically recommend interest rates to be set by the state treasurer that are the lowest practicable rates consistent with maintaining the long-term integrity of the firm. But the interest rate may be less than the prevailing borrowing rates available to similarly situated applicants from private lenders, but not less than 0%. So this is contemplating you could have quite low interest rates available on these longer term loans, right?
And this is all existing, like,
This is all existing language. There's a slight stylus.
except for the which to that.
Exactly, just a stylistic. On page 16, you start to see the updates here. The first call out, subdivisions 1 and 4. This is a cleanup that should have already been here, but notwithstanding subdivision 1. What this section does is it makes available even greater advantage terms. It provides for even longer term length, and it also provides for potentially lower interest rates. Because it provides for a longer loan term, it needs to notwithstand subdivision 1, which says no payable over a term not to exceed 30 years. So that's cleanup, not a substantive change. The real piece here is expansion to the eligible mobile home park water system we talked about. But let me just read through what this says. Admittedly, this is an incredibly hard to understand sentence, but I will read it nonetheless. A privately owned nonprofit community type system may qualify for a 40-year loan term at an interest rate plus fee established by the Secretary of Natural Resources. It shall be not more than 3% or less than minus 3%, provided that the applicant meets the income level and annual household user cost requirements of a disadvantaged municipality. The word is an eligible mobile home park water system, and at least 80% of the residential units served by the water system continue to be occupied by local residents, and at least 80% of the water produced is for residential use. This is not my favorite sentence, but because it has existed for a long time and people are currently administering it with an understanding, don't disrupt it. You know, essentially that's the thought here. But to say what this does is it makes available these up to 40-year loan terms with potentially even more advantageous interest rates, right? It could go down to this minus 3% to a certain set of applicants. Those applicants need to be either a system that meets income level and user cost requirements of this disadvantaged municipality, which is a definition that I'm not familiar with, but that's existing law. Or they need to be this eligible mobile home park water system. They also have to meet other conditions. So those are the two groups that are kicked into this possibility. They also have to have at least 80% of the residential units continuously occupied by local residents and at least 80% of the water produced used for that residential use. So those are all the conditions. This is just expanding existing law to make available, in addition to applicant systems that meet this. In addition to those applicant systems, you could have an eligible mobile home park water system.
Yeah, personally, I think this is good. I mean, I understand why it's not your favorite sentence, but the program is good. I worked for a town who was disadvantaged, and the negative 3% at the time, I thought that's a weird way to do it, but it essentially is a grant.
Yes.
So I don't know why they do the negative 3%, but well, I'm just not going to propose anything different because it works.
I'll just say that my troubles don't relate to the minus 3%, but it's good to know that there
We
are
all
many
have
troubles.
ours.
Yeah.
No, but it actually is a really good
Yeah.
program in terms of helping communities.
Yeah, I just think this sentence gonna be so much clearer, but I don't want to be the one to rewrite it also, so that's good too. Subdivision C. There is a substantive piece produced here that I haven't really addressed yet. So, excuse me, what subdivision C says is that for those systems that qualify for a loan, the secretary shall certify that loan term and interest rate to VIA. I'm going to read this without the new language, so I'm going to read this struck through and then I'll come back to the underline. Under current law, in no instance shall that annual interest rate plus administrative fee be less than is necessary to achieve an annual household user cost equal to 1% of the median household income of the applicant water system, computed as prescribed elsewhere in, I think, Title 24. So what this is saying is that above in A, you provide these even more advantage terms, right? Longer interest rate, greater flexibility, or a lower floor for what the interest rate could be. But there's a separate floor that is imposed by this subdivision C. It says in no instance shall that annual interest rate plus fee be less than is necessary to achieve this calculation. Annual household user cost equal to 1% of the median household income computed in the same manner as prescribed elsewhere. What this language change does is creates the most advantaged terms essentially for these eligible mobile home park water systems. It exempts those eligible mobile home park water systems from this specific requirement. It says that except as applied to an eligible mobile home park water system, they are kept out of this. The secretary shall not certify an annual interest rate plus administrative fee that is less than is necessary to, etc. So essentially the floor of no less than is necessary to achieve that annual user household cost does not apply to the eligible mobile home park water systems, meaning they could get potentially the lowest interest rate possible. Still would need to be certified to be the that's what these sections do. Okay.
And they're both, I'm sorry, they're privately owned nonprofit. So that wasn't, I was working for a municipality. So this is interesting that it's privately owned nonprofits.
I also-
Other systems there. Okay, I'll.
Yeah, I mean, I also pointed this out here, like doubly specifying both privately owned and nonprofit, but
Most mobile home parks may not be connected to the municipal water system, but may have their own water system serving the mobile home park. And so I think that's what this is trying to get at is.
Oh, I
Facility.
definitely, and that's why they're adding mobile home park, and I'm very supportive of that. It's just the underlying, but
Yeah.
I'm just gonna figure it out.
I think this is threading the needle of not disrupting existing practice while extending availability to these eligible mobile home park water systems. That's the attempt here.
Yeah, and they're very generous rates. So, okay.
Okay. Jumping out of the Department of Environmental Conservation piece, we're on page 17. New policy section for Division for Historic Preservation. This one's quite easy to understand. The Historic Preservation Officer already has the ability to receive grants, gifts, donations for these specific purposes. Use by the Division for Historic Preservation in establishing and maintaining displays and exhibits at any historic site and at the Vermont Archaeology Heritage Center, or restoring any historic site maintained and developed under section 723 or Title 22. What this does is it grants the Historic Preservation Officer additionally the ability to solicit grants, gifts, and donations. You're going to see some notwithstanding language here, and that's because the Ethics Code under Title III prohibits public agents, such I don't recall the exact technical term, but someone standing in for the state basically from soliciting grants or gifts. And so to ensure that no ethical violation would result, even though you authorize it in law, that's why you notwithstand that. That's why this section is not withstood. This is extending the ability to solicit grants for that state historic preservation officer. And what you see in subsection B is it does require the approval of the Secretary of Administration to solicit those grants. So there's a process. It would have to go through the Secretary of Administration. And in that request for approval, the officer would need to specify the project and fundraising goal for which that fundraising is occurring.
I just want to go back to the mobile parks for a second. You know, in the testimony, how many mobile home parks actually qualify in this definition? Because most mobile home parks are owned privately and folk rent their site in the mobile home park. So they're actually, you want to call them for profit, they're for profit, but even though they don't make much money. And then the owners of the park, they own the actual water system. And people pay a user fee for getting their water. So I'm just wondering if they talked about, I'm guessing this applies to a very small subset of mobile home parks within the state, but I
Yeah.
don't know for sure.
I don't know the answer to that, but I think what you would want to know is the number of nonprofit or resident-owned mobile home parks
Yeah.
that are registered with DHCD, which I'm sure that number could be reduced.
What percentage of
Yeah.
mobile home parks were actually held?
And then you would need to know the water systems that have meet those 80%, thresholds.
Yeah, and they would be looking, I would think, for new water systems probably, and,
Well, a lot of the mobile home
Yeah.
park systems, a lot of them are old.
yeah,
The infrastructure with them is in pretty poor shape. And a lot of times the owners don't have the resources to do major upgrades for those systems without significantly increasing the rate to the folk in the park who really don't have the means. And so it's that.
oh, definitely, no, and there's a lot of
So-
issues.
And
Yeah.
so I'm just wondering how many parks this really helps versus the number of parks we have that could use help.
We had a mobile home task force a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and that, there's a report that shows how many parks there are, and what we expected to have happen is some of those private parks would, become, I want to say co-ops, but, owned
Yeah.
by the residents because they need to do that to become financially viable. But yes, we can get you that.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's good. You know, it's a big issue actually, and it's important to make them work. Okay,
Okay. On page,
solicitation.
yes, so what this does is it extends the authority to the state historic preservation officer to solicit these same kinds of gifts for these same specified purposes. And it would be required to submit a request for approval to the Secretary of Administration, and they would need to specify the project and fundraising goal. And the notwithstanding is to avoid an ethical violation, essentially. I will just note, I know this sort of thing makes people feel uncomfortable. And, just try it or not, depending on how you feel. I did talk to some folks in my office, and as I understand it, I don't have ready to hand the examples, but this would not be the first instance of extending a state body the ability to solicit grants, but it is I think, a relatively limited number of folks who have this authority.
It would be one person. The
In
state
this case.
historic preservation.
Yes, I just mean to say this is not the first instance
Oh.
where someone has proposed a state agency to have the ability to solicit grants.
Okay, and we can get the SHPO in to testify. Was there controversy on this?
I don't think controversy is the right word. It's just the sort of thing that makes people feel uncomfortable, and having to notwithstand an ethics session
Yeah,
to allow something to happen can be uncomfortable, not for me, but for you guys. And, who thought that this could be an ethics violation? It's just that if you look at 1203G, it explicitly prohibits the solicitation of gifts under.
By a public servant for themselves.
Do you read it narrowly to be that they would be able broadly to solicit other things on behalf of their agency? I take it to be to ensure that there is not a potential ethical violation, that even a solicitation on behalf of the department could run the risk of ethical violation. So that's the
You probably
theory.
have more than I have, but.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say controversial, and I think my description of the committee's position would be that they felt comfortable with the state historic preservation officer, and the discomfort related more to a slippery slope type argument, that if all kinds of folks started coming in and asking for this ability, that would raise some red flags. But I think that's why you have it here. They wouldn't have included it if they had gotten truly uncomfortable.
And the conversations that I recall were more, what can we do to help you preserve the historic buildings in Vermont? If she could find a grant, the Benjamin Monument, for instance, that'd be great. because you can only fund so much through taxpayer money, so.
Right. Okay,
Okay,
great.
next we jump to Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, section 13. This is something that my colleague Michael Grady drafted. I don't have too much to say about this, but I can run through it. This is authority for a Little River State Park lease. In FY27, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Rec authorized to enter into a long-term lease with the Vermont Huts Association. Lease the structure at the Little River State Park and the land on which that structure is located. And then it sets out a number of conditions that have to be met. The lease has specified the term of 20 years with an option to renew for an additional 2 10-year terms at the Commissioner's discretion. PRP formula to be used to compensate the state, conditions on the use of the structure, and then that the association shall secure insurance subject to indemnification clause consistent with attachment C of bulletin 3.5, which is part of your standard contracting measures for the state. Provisions for the termination of the lease, requirements for the operation and maintenance of the lease structures and lands, including responsibility for cost of maintenance, how any conflict between the parties would be resolved, and that a contract between the department and the Vermont Huts Association executed in accordance with that rules of 3.5 be required for the relocation and reconstruction of the Goodell House located at the Little River State Park. So what this does as a whole, it's saying in FY27, Commissioner had the authority to enter into this long-term lease, but it needs to meet all these conditions. If it didn't meet any of them, notice the and, if it was missing one of them, but not all of the others. And they did not resolve that issue essentially within FY27, the authority would no longer exist. The authority only exists for FY27.
Okay, I don't see, like, I mean, there's says the fee or fee formula to be used to compensate the state. I don't see any adjectives about that, so we'll get, I'd like to know more about this.
One other thing about this, Madam Chair, is because they would be entering into a lease, which would have revenue coming into the state of Vermont. This was another section that sent the bill to Ways and Means. Currently, there is no money coming in because they haven't even entered into the beginning part of negotiations to talk about the conversation they're going to have in the future. So far, there is nothing to say, but this might trigger this bill, I guess, to go to finance.
Okay. I just think there ought to be just accountability for the terms of the lease.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason for all of the conditions, right? You could have just had a generic authorization. But this is like a very specific set of lease conditions that have to be met.
Yeah, it does have conditions, but it doesn't, or it has items, but it doesn't have any parameters of them. But that's for us to figure out, I guess, or for someone to figure out.
On page 19, this originated in House Corrections and Institutions, Authority for Property Transfer to Southern State Correctional Facility. You may recall that I think it was either the 2023 or 2024 capital bill also contained authority for BGS to transfer a portion of the Southern State Correctional Facility to the town of Springfield. That was for about 10 acres and for different purposes. This section would replace that old authorization, which you'll see shortly is repealed. So notwithstanding the standard sections that govern sale, transfer of real estate by BGS, BGS is authorized to transfer to the town of Springfield a portion of the Southern State Correctional Facility consisting of approximately 23 acres, be used for municipal purposes, including economic development as an industrial parcel, provided the commissioner may transfer the property only if, then we have these conditions. The state obtains any state or local zoning, subdivision approval required for transfer. The state and the town negotiate updates to a pre-existing 1999 agreement to establish responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of the access road and the water and sewer service lines from the facility and the transferred property, mitigate impacts to the Springfield community, and that the transferred property does not include any brownfield. So those are your 3 conditions for before any transfer could happen of this roughly 23 acres to the town of Springfield. Obtain state or local zoning or subdivision approvals, negotiate updates to the 99 agreement to deal with maintenance and upkeep, and mitigate impacts to the Springfield community, and ensure that the transfer property doesn't include any brownfields. Subsection B establishes kind of a check-in if the property has been transferred in 2030, and it says that the town hasn't begun developing that transferred property for purposes of economic development, sort of the intended goal here. By the end of March 2030, the town shall consult with the Commissioner of BGS to examine alternative uses for the property. So it's saying the intent is that this be used for economic development. That hasn't, started happening. By March 2030, there's a check-in with BGS to see what else could be done. I will note that this presumes that it has been transferred, right? If the town is not been developing the transferred property, well, not going to be developing property that has been transferred to it. So A sets out the authority to transfer. B has a check-in if it's been transferred on what's done with the development in 2030. And this is tied as well to section 15. Top of page 20, subsection A is repealing that old 2024 capital bill language that provided the same authority, but for a different purpose. That's now repealed and replaced with this provision, essentially. Another way to have done this would have been to have amended that section. I think it's probably a bit cleaner to just have outright the section here. The piece I did want to call out is section B removes the authority. It repeals the preceding section on July 1, 2030. So what that means is, we scroll back up. This extends authority to BGS to transfer that property or a portion of that property for specific purposes. And if it hasn't been transferred by July 1, 2030, the authority evaporates, essentially. And note that these are the conditions that have to be met. So if any of these conditions are not met by that July 1, 2030, BGS would need new authority essentially to transfer it. That's in section 14 and 15.
So this is not the garage that they talked about previously. Okay. I look forward to find out what it is.
Not that I know, unless folks have other information than I do.
Al's mentioned it's a industrial park. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, I thought that's what John said for industrial park.
Yeah, it's an industrial.
Yeah,
Purpose.
it's an industrial parcel.
Specifically, that's, let me get one.
Okay.
Okay. On page 20, we were looking about this yesterday outside of committee. Section 16 is high-end systems facilities for review. This is language that is duplicated in the budget. This is part of a broader kind of trying to find a more neutral way to describe this. The background to this, so what this does is this provides essentially a monthly check-in in the off session, an attempt to get information from the Agency of Human Services on what the plan is to develop the Green Mountain Youth Campus, and specifically a complete unambiguous written analysis of the estimated costs of an annual operating budget with a proposed 41-bed hydrant system of care. So in the 2025 budget, this is one of the requests, was that there be a 5-year operating budget provided for this plan. That information has not been forthcoming. I think this has been an effort over multiple years to get this information on what the operating budget would be. This is saying we want to check in progress on that complete unambiguous written analysis during the off session this year. And then, more significantly, subsection B, prohibiting any expenditure of funds for further development, including DCF and buildings and general services, until either the Joint Fiscal Committee in consultation with chairs of the institutions committees approves the resumption of expenditures for that Green Mountain Youth Campus upon reviewing those reports, or the General Assembly authorizes the resumption of spending by legislative act. So broadly, what these sections do, and again, this is duplicated in the budget, so it's just being included in multiple places as a kind of demand to the administration. It's saying the legislator wants this information on the operating budget. It's hard to know how to proceed with anything until that information is received. Spending is going to be shut down in FY27 until either that information is forthcoming, and if it's forthcoming off session, Joint Fiscal Committee has the authority to approve it based on those reports that are received monthly, or if the legislature has resumed at the point that you receive that information, do receive it, then the legislature itself would need to authorize spending again. So this would prohibit spending for these purposes in FY27 until approval comes to resume spending by either Joint Fiscal Committee or the General Assembly. Again, this is something that is in the budget. It is exactly duplicated word for word in the capital as you've received it, and that was the request, was just to throw in what had been included in the budget. So if you start to touch this section, I'm guessing lots of folks will have feelings about that. But you're free to do whatever you like. Just letting you know that they are not going to react.
Any questions?
Well, I guess it's just been. Just again, my own thing is I hate to have the exact same piece repeated in multiple places because that just can end up coming back to haunt you. So if it's already in the bill, why do we even need it here?
I agree with all of your intuitions about this, which is that it creates the possibility of an error. The reason I was asked to include it in the capital bill, even though it was already present in the budget, was that I think Chair Emmons wanted to ensure that this was available come Commerce Committee, and it's basically available in the most places possible. She wanted to ensure that she had some say in the matter. The original language originated in Human Services. So part of this is an attempt also for different committees to have a say in the matter.
Okay.
So that is the, yes. Sorry, I'm jumping through tabs. Okay. Lastly, you'll note that there was that cash appropriation of 3 million. I think it was cash, to the Department of Corrections for installation of Wi-Fi. And it is tied as well to the Section 17 policy section. It is very important. The Commissioner of Corrections and the Chief Information Officer of Digital Services shall monthly report during adjournment in this calendar year to the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee in consultation with the institution's chairs on the installation of Wi-Fi in state correctional facilities. That's authorized in the cash section that we already spoke to. So,
And that's the previous authorization.
yep. So that's that is the capital bill. Takes effect on passage.
All right. Well, thank you.
Sure.
And your timing is good. Is it we thought hour and a half?
Yeah, no, this was awesome. Thank you guys.
Okay. Anybody have any additional questions? So there's several things that I'd like to get testimony on. We can talk about, we talked about them as we went through. We talked about them again, but I would rather take 7 minutes to adjourn and